You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
I try to be quite understandable of situations. There's always somebody has to win, and it can be always you. So the one thing I learned, I like to watch a lot of the top, sport people. They always have a lesson to share. And I watch, this wonderful coach, giving an interview. And I honestly didn't know who he was, but he gave an interview, and, they asked him if he thought that, the season that they didn't win the championship was a failure, and he said, look, Michael Jordan played 11 seasons in the NBA and he only won 6 titles. Mm-hmm. Were the other 5 failures? And he said they weren't. Tom Brady played about 12 seasons in the NFL and he only won 6 titles. Was that a failure? So the reality, all those, major successful sport people, they didn't win every single time they went to compete. And instead of, taking that as a failure, they take that as a lesson, as a journey to the success. So whenever we're not winning, as a team, I always think, okay, this has to be teaching us something. This is, I don't like not to win, but I have to take the positive out of, losing. And instead of calling it a failure, I call it, the process to the win, the process to success.
Welcome to the Practical Horseman podcast, featuring conversations with respected riders, industry leaders, and horse care experts. The show is co-hosted by Practical Horseman editors, and our goal is to inform, educate, and inspire. I'm Julia Murphy, and this week's episode is one of the top trainers in the United States and the owner and founder of Stonehenge Stables, Max Amaya. Born in Argentina, Max was exposed to show jumping at age 9 by his grandfather and learned to ride under his tutelage. After moving through the junior ranks and onto the South American Grand Prix circuit, Max moved to Canada to work for Mario Delorier in 1992. Then, in 2000, Max made the final decision to relocate to the U.S., where he was introduced to Stacia Klein-Madden and Frank Madden and joined the team at Beacon Hill Stables. During that time, Max got the ride on Church Road, a horse that he rode at the World Equestrian Games and the Pan American Games, and who he speaks lovingly about during our conversation. When he wasn't competing, Max brought his show jumping expertise to students at Beacon Hill and trained countless to success. In 2006, Max founded his own training business, Stonehenge Stables, which is located in Colts Neck, New Jersey. Stonehenge provides a range of training from short stirrup to Grand Prix, with the foundation rooted in traditional equitation principles, skills that Max believes are what propels U.S. riders to such great heights. His students are ranked among the country's top riders in the junior, amateur, and professional divisions, with 19 ribbons won at major equitation finals, 10 ribbons at the North American Young Rider Championships, and 4 that have ridden on the United States equestrian team. Before we dive into the podcast, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this week's episode, Purina Animal Nutrition, and share their message. This podcast is sponsored by Purina Animal Nutrition, with 3 research-backed ration balancers to fill nutritional gaps in your horse's diet. Enrich Plus delivers a concentrated source of protein, vitamins, and minerals without unnecessary calories. Enrich Plus Senior features Active Age prebiotic technology and Outlast supplement for aging easy keepers. And Omega Match is rich in omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin E, great for horses without access to green grass. Find a ration balancer for your horse at purinamills.com/ration balancers or visit your local feed store. Now, enjoy the episode with Max. Well, thank you so much for being with me today. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So let's dive right in. My first question for you is just how did you get interested in horses and riding to begin with?
Well, I was born in Argentina, and my grandfather was in the army, especially with horses. And just, at an early age, my older brother, Victor, was hanging out with him a lot. He was about probably 9, 10 years old, and I was just turning 8, and I was a little bit afraid of horses. But, just as a activity that we did with our grandpa, I started going, and then by the age of 11, 12, I started, riding with him. I was quite timid about horses, but, he just, threw me right into it, and that's how it was.
And this was in Argentina?
In Argentina, yes, in Buenos Aires.
And so when did you make your way to the States?
Well, when I finished high school, my parents were very adamant about me going to college. So I kind of like follow what they wanted me to do for about 5, 6 months into business school. And I just really did not like what I was doing. So I told my father that I wanted to leave and I wanted to go to the States. It was always a dream of mine since I was 14 years old to come to the States. So I dropped out of college and I made my way to Montreal, actually, to Bromont. And just by coincidence, I had a friend that was doing 3-day event, and he told me there was a nice show there, 3-day event show, and then a show jumping show. And I just, I really didn't have any idea what that was or anything, but I just got a ticket and some cash, and off I went. And then I was lucky enough that I ended up with Roger Deloria, Mario Deloria's dad, and he gave me a job, and I was basically grooming, riding, doing all chores in the barn, and trying to learn as much as I could from it. And I stayed there for 3 years. Then I had to come back to Argentina for a brief time because my mother was sick. And then in 1999, I made myself back thanks to Joe Fargis. He connected me with Beacon Hill, and I made myself back to New Jersey, and I've been there ever since then, 24 years.
So when you connected with Joe Fargis and you started at Beacon Hill, was that around the time when you decided that you wanted to do this professionally?
I was already doing it professionally. When I decided to go to Canada, that's when I decided this was going to be my life. When I went back to Argentina for a few years, it was about 4 years. I worked for a very nice family, the Wertheins, and I was already getting paid and being a professional. And then when I connected with Joe Fargis through Beacon Hill, they were overlooking a farm very near their facility in New Jersey named Synergy Stables that was owned by the Diaco family. And they needed a rider, manager, trainer, and everything guy. And they had a very small group of horses, about 16 horses. They were not really competition horses. So I don't know, for some reason, I thought it was the right thing. I liked, Frank and Stacia Madden when I met them, and, they offered me that position there, and I just took it.
And then you went on to establish your own Stonehenge stables. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process and what brought you to opening that yourself, opening your own training program?
For some reason, I always, ever since I was, young and I had a little bit of an idea of what I wanted to do, I always wanted to run my own business. I didn't know enough about the pro and the cons, but I just knew that I wanted to be my own person. So when I came, I remember having conversations with, Stacia and just telling her that, my goal and my dream was to probably run my own facility at some point. And I didn't understand at the time, but I knew the sacrifice and the time that I had to wait. So basically in 2003, I met Sarah Becker, which she had a horse named Church Road. And, by coincidence, she offered me the horse to jump in the Nations Cup in Wellington, Florida, and I accepted. And the horse was not a Grand Prix horse or anything. It was her amateur jumper that she very kindly offered it to me. And then from then on, things went on because the horse was really a good, match for me. It was probably a match of a lifetime. He changed my career and my perspective on the sport. And I went on for about almost 4.5 years jumping him FEI. I was lucky enough that I went to the World Championships in Germany in 2006, the Pan American Games 2007, a few Nations Cups, and an Europe tour and so on. So by the time that my career was taking off with him, I started feeling, that it was starting to get to the time that I wanted to try to launch my business and see what happened. But I was young, but not that young. Today they sometimes, young professionals at the age of 23, 24, they embark on that. For me, I was 32 years old and I felt it was the right moment, and I was already about 7, almost 8 years, in New Jersey working for Synergy under, the Beacon Hill umbrella. So anyway, it felt right. And the reason why, I picked that moment is because I just felt it was the right time.
And how did that process go for you, building your own show farm, from the ground up and, getting business and creating this business for yourself?
It was hard in a way, and it was somewhere easy because Synergy, the facility I was at, was owned by, a family that the wife wrote and didn't compete or anything. She just had it as a, business, but mostly a hobby that she had. And basically all the people that were there that were just training with me, and they probably 20% of them will see, Beacon Hill at the shows. When I was with them, they will probably do most of the training. But at the time, I was already about 4.5 years working with Brion and Clementine Goutal. There were other people there also that they were, writing at Synergy with me. So when I decided that I wanted to open my own business, I tried to stay at the facility and offer some sort of a, rental and participation to the owner, but she was quite wealthy, wasn't interested on that. So anyway, they said that if I wasn't there, they probably will close down the place or not run it. So anyway, I end up teaming up with the Curcio family, Carol and Curcio, which now resides in England. Rode with me in the jumpers and rode with Beacon Hill in the equitation. And Bob and Barbara Curcio, her parents, were really into the sport. And Bob, being a developer, himself, he said, "Oh, I'm going to buy a land and then build a farm however we wanted." And so he did. He bought, in Colts Neck, 26 acres, in a beautiful, cul-de-sac, and we built the farm together. Obviously he funded it all and just put ideas and my experience into it. And it took about a year, and then within a year we moved there, and I had about 44 horses, which was quite impressive at the time for me. I was really excited, but I didn't know a lot about business sense. So there were some very rocky roads on the way.
And now you've been doing this for a long time now, and you've been super successful, not only riding, but also training and just having this incredible business. So what is it that has kept you going in this sport for so long?
Well, the first thing is that I'm always being driven. I'm always wanting to get better every day. I'm 49 years old, and I still feel like when I was 19, I really want to do better. I've been very lucky to work with amazing riders. For the last 16 years, I had a partnership with Stacia Madden at Beacon Hill, and that's been phenomenal for me because we complement each other. My business grew a lot. I have a very nice relationship with Brion Goutal, who, by the way, has her own business, very successful now, and we stay very connected. We work together. And then in 2011, my business was actually at the time very thin, not so many horses, not so many rides. I was competing myself, and it was not, booming. But the O'Mara family, Tom and Lisa O'Mara had, 4 children, 3 daughters and 1 son.
Yeah.
And I knew the daughters very well, but they never rode with me. And they had an 11-year-old son named TJ. And the mother called me while I was in Florida and says, "Max, my name is Lisa O'Mara. I think we met. Yes. I have my son, TJ, he's 11 years old, and we would really like to see if we could set him up with you at your place." So he came, he was a young boy, and, I could tell that he really wanted to do the sport. He was so, at that young age, so intriguing about what we did. And, he will stay at the barn for long hours. And, I don't know, I don't have, many male riders. They're all pretty much females, So for me, it was very interesting. I really enjoyed, working with him. And he grew up and he matured in the barn, and, he made a real, goal of him to succeed at however he could. But I remember him being probably 13 years old, and he told me he was going to win a final, which I found it really, cool. He was such a young kid, and having all those dreams. So anyway, I just had a little bit of a bond with him from an early age. I had a really nice feeling. And then obviously he went on to, win 2 finals, third in another one. I believe he got almost like in 2 years, he got like 12 ribbons in, finals together. And work on his, jumper experience. And anyway, he started working for me in the summers when he wasn't going to college in, Kentucky University. And I just, at that point, I knew that he was special and he had all the same, drive and desires that I had. So I felt myself very reflected on him. And I started putting a lot of myself, I was starting to stop competing at the high level. So I was putting a lot of my goals and dreams into him little by little. And he went to Europe for a short time to work with a friend of mine, Jos Lansing, which helped him a lot. And then when he came, he just decided to be committed, and he became a key part of the team, alongside my sister-in-law and my brother Victor.
Yeah, I actually I juniored out the same year as TJ. So and you did an incredible job training him. I mean, he was always a tough one to to ride against.
Yeah.
He was absolutely incredible in the ring. And now, he's working full time for you, and I know that he just had some really great success at Devon too with a couple students, right?
Yes, he does a wonderful job, and at the beginning when he came, obviously he's basically educated, by our style and the way we do things and all that. So he adopted that and he's making his own. But about 2 years ago, I had a little bit of a medical, bypass by myself. I had a little standby medically, during indoors. So I remember he was already working for me, and it was the first year we had, Carly McCutcheon and a few other riders. And I remember I called him. I said, "Listen, I won't be able to attend. I was in the hospital and whatnot." So I said, "You're gonna have to carry the flag, and you'll do good." And he did a fantastic job. So I felt very comfortable to the fact of making him way more responsible and involved in what we do. And he's taking on from then. And I feel very comfortable. Allowing him to have a real participation and a spotlight into what he's doing. Sometimes I find that some of the older trainers, they feel a little bit, skeptical about allowing that. And I understand why. Sometimes people go and come. And so it's a little bit of a difficult, spot to give up that easy. You work so hard for so many years to build, and then you just put a young person in, and sometimes they don't last too long. But I don't know. I believe in him. He's like family to me, and he's earning everything that he's getting. So you have to allow young people to come, just like I was allowed, and give opportunities and promote, and his time is going to come, and my time is going to end, and I want him to be successful.
Oh, that's amazing. And along with TJ, I mean, you have countless successful junior riders who came up, through the equitation and now are incredible in their careers past that, whether it be amateur or professional. So what kind of inspired you to work with juniors, especially in the equitation?
Well, when I came in '99 was my first exposure to the equitation full time, obviously at one of the best barns, in the country, being Beacon Hill. And then they had the best riders. Yeah. So I fell in love. I fell in love with what equitation is all about, what it represents, and what it does for the riders, and yet I rode in all those international championships and all that for Argentina. I became a U.S. citizen in 2012. And, very quickly after 2013-14, I changed my nationality to the U.S. as a rider, even though I rode for another couple of years, that's all. But I have been lucky enough to go to World Cup finals with several different riders. I believe this one I went, it was my 11th one, but I've been there with Brion Goutal, who came through the equitation. Charlie Jacobs was a real fun one to go with, because we're a similar age and we had a lot of fun. And he's a very, fearful competitor, and he likes to do well. And then I've been there with Alessandra Volpis, one of my recent, riders, which is also an amazing talent. And, she's making her way through Nations Cups and all that, and has that drive and that passion to do well. So, the reality is that the equitation, I believe, is the base to creating so many amazing riders for this country. And, being in big Grand Prix, Nations Cup, or World Cup finals with some of these riders that I know have come through all that, base, it just makes me proud. It makes me really happy. I enjoy doing it.
And moving from that, I'd like to talk a little bit about your training philosophy. So how would you describe your teaching style when you're working with your students?
Well, it's quite interesting because I always, it sounds cliche, but I always put the horses first. Like I think about
Of
what the
course.
horses need, and how to train them, and then what the rider needs, and try to come up with a good mix of what the rider needs and what the horse will need. And we don't overdo it. I don't believe in overdoing it. I think if you train, for example, the open water and you do it 2, 3 times, that's enough. You don't need to do it more. Even though if your horse is probably not doing it perfect, just I like to leave them with a good experience.
Yeah.
I believe in flat work a lot. I think having the horse, flatting completely in sync with the rider it's probably 50% of having a successful round. Um, I do try to learn from other riders and trainers, successful ones that I respect. I ask, I try to keep improving my training, ability in order to keep succeeding. I never think I know everything. I just try to always learn from new devices, new exercises, new beats, new everything, new supplements, whatever they do to make, things better.
And when you are teaching students, do you ever find that there's one thing that a lot of them need to work on?
I think it is. And I think probably most students for every other trainer would maybe feel the same way. And it's the nerves that, translate into insecurities. I always believe that
Mm-hmm.
everybody has a good distance. The problem is that our thoughts and our feelings at the moment interfere with our body telling the horse what to do.
Yeah.
If you're trotting, up the street and you want to jump a little, curve or a little something, you know how to measure your step to get there and jump it the right way. The problem is when we are on a horse, we have to measure their step, and we have tools, whether our legs, our seat, our hands, our voice, our body, all of that contributes into helping that horse get to the right step to get over the obstacle. And our brain, or our emotions get in the way, or our fears get in the way of, well, I'm not going to get there, or that's spooky, or this, all those thoughts get to our body to do things that sometimes we don't even want them to do. And so we pull or we kick or we do something based on what we saw at that moment, but it's not that we don't have a distance.
And do you have a favorite exercise to work on helping your students develop their eye defenses?
Yes, I think it's cavalleries. I love
Hmm.
cavalleries. I do a lot of them. I place them in front of jumps, at a certain, short distance, whether it's 2 strides, 1 or 3, not more than that. But I think that cavalry is a very unintimidating, obstacle. They're normally about 12 inches. They're small. So when you do so many of them all related with each other, you put, 1 or 2 in front of some jumps, and then it, it creates a little bit of a good habit. I believe if you create good habits at home, they will translate into the ring. You create good habits, and then you have those good habits when you don't even think about it.
Yeah, I know. I'm just thinking you have that wonderful article with the magazine. I think it was building confidence in jumpers or in jumper
Yes.
riders. And I think
Yeah.
you go through some of those exercises in that article as well.
Yeah, and they're all small. I don't
Hmm.
overface the rider or the horse. I just like myself. When I ride, I try to do small things to develop a good feel, a good habit, and confidence in what I'm doing. And then you have to little by little start increasing the height in order to feel comfortable in what you're doing. And trust me, that it eventually pays off. It takes a little bit of time, but it pays off.
And you mentioned nerves before, like you said, I think that's something that every rider struggles with. So, for both yourself and your students, how do you handle nerves, or how do you yourself handle nerves? And then how do you help your students work through that?
Well, when I was, riding, competing at the high level, I never found myself to be an overly nervous rider. I was, I had doubts and questions about, the bigger tracks that I've done and championships, but I was never nervous. I got up to the gate and I knew I was there for a reason. I knew what I had to do, and I knew that I had the skills to do it. So all I had to do is try to do it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but I was very comfortable with that. But, being in the, coaching side for quite a long time, I have had riders with more or less nerves, but they all have some weird nerves. And what
Hmm.
I do, I try to learn from the rider. Sometimes the rider lets me know, but I try to learn from them what works for them. Some riders like to talk a lot. We go over the course, we go over this, we go over that, and reinforce, what they know how to do. Like in this case, I have a wonderful, young lady, Rolly Heiler. She's been doing great lately. And for her, it really works to go over the course a lot of times, to talk about the plan, to repeat the plan, to talk about what not to do, what to prevent. And then on the other hand, similar age, doing, some big stuff too. Alessandra Volpi, she does not love to talk too much. She likes to tell me a little. So you learn a little bit what works with each rider, and you try to reinforce that, not try to establish your own way and make them, force them into something that they're not comfortable. You have to, realize what works for them to calm their nerves or to make themselves feel better, and then try to go that way.
Do you ever get nervous as a trainer when you're ringside watching your students go in?
Every time, I don't get scared. I get nervous because of different reasons. If I'm moving,
you want them to do well.
Yes, if I'm moving a kid up, I just want them to do well. And if I have one of these, riders that I have that are competing, at the level that they are already, I want them to win. So those are the nerves that I encounter.
And I want to get into a little bit more of your competitive background. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the most meaningful successes or wins that you've had in your career?
Well, I think, not result related, but, having the opportunity to jump a very nice, world championship and finishing the top, 1/3 was something that really affected me in a good way, in a positive way. The same with the Pan American Games. I had a few Nations Cup where we, were top 3. So that was very important to me. And then I was second in the Grand Prix of Devon in 2005, if I don't recall wrong. Then, I had a few very good classes, with Church Road that meant a lot for me. I was third, with another horse named, Cartier in the Gold Cup, and that meant a lot to me too. I think, a lot of my career, I wasn't necessarily, a top winning rider. I always had ribbons, and I was a tiny bit more conservative than aggressively fast. And as a coach, I get a little bit more aggressive when I know I have a rider that can be aggressive,
Right. And I know you mentioned Church Road a couple of times now. Along with him, what are some other horses that have been influential in your career?
Well, the first horse I ever had was obviously in Argentina, and it was a thoroughbred of the track named Mariano. And he was a very difficult horse. He couldn't jump in the school in Arab. He allowed me to jump the first decent big tracks. They were 145s and 150s. But, it felt with that horse very big. And for me, for the first time, it felt very big. I was in, my, early 20s when I came back from being in Canada. So that was quite nice. Then when I came to the States, I had the first real horse that I got was Church Road, as I mentioned, a little bit by accident. And he stayed with me for almost 4.5 years, and we did the biggest stuff I ever jumped in my life with him. And then as I, part ways with him, Barney Ward called me. I'm very, very, very close with McLean, and McLean mentioned to him that I was parting ways with my Grand Prix horse. So he called me. He says, I hear you don't have a horse anymore. I have a mare that you should sit on. So, long story short, I ended up with Ademain, which was at the time an 8-year-old Belgian mare, big mare. I was never used to ride a big horse. It was a big, slow mare. But, we did at least probably 3 Nations Cup with her and, Palm Beach Circuit. And it was really a wonderful horse that then when she couldn't do the big stuff anymore, ended up doing, USAT finals with, TJ O'Mara, with Megan McPherson, a few of my riders. So it was quite a wonderful horse. And then after her, I, bought a horse for a student from Texas named Heads Up from Alexa Lowe. That original name was Cartier, and he actually jumps a few Grand Prix with me at the Hamptons, Gold Cup, and it was a very nice horse that I ended up also selling to another student of mine. And then my last horse that I jumped, among other horses that I'm probably forgetting, but my last horse was a horse named Bueno that belonged to Sidney Keith. And, he was a little bit of a difficult horse, came from Germany, and I did some, Grand Prix with him, but it was a little bit towards the end of my career. And I had a big, groin injury in 2012. So for the following 4 years until 2016, I struggled with that a lot, and then it was time for me to not jump big anymore.
And in your time competing, this sport is very unpredictable, and sometimes we don't always win as much as we'd like, or we don't have as much success as we're hoping for. So, how do you deal with, not winning as much or not being as successful as you'd like?
I try to be quite understandable of situations. There's always somebody has to win, and it can be always you. So the one thing I learned, I like to watch a lot of the top, sport people. They always have a lesson to share. And I watch, this wonderful coach, giving an interview. And I honestly didn't know who he was, but he gave an interview, and, they asked him if he thought that this season that they didn't win the championship was a failure, and he said, look, Michael Jordan played 11 seasons in the NBA and he only won 6 titles. Mm-hmm. Were the other 5 failures? And he said they weren't. Tom Brady played about 12 seasons in the NFL and he only won 6 titles. Was that a failure? So the reality, all those, major successful sport people, they didn't win every single time they went to compete. And instead of taking that as a failure, they take that as a lesson, as a journey to the success. So whenever we're not winning, as a team, I always think, okay, this has to be teaching us something. This is, I don't like not to win, but I have to take the positive out of, losing. And instead of calling it a failure, I call it, the process to the win, the process to success.
Mm-hmm. And back when you were competing, did you have any kind of big routine before your classes, like any kind of superstitions?
Well, funny you ask. I think that we all have that a little bit, but mine, I wear always, the same, breeches, the same, underwear, the same shirt, the same socks, the same everything. Yeah. I stopped for coffee at the same place, and I did everything the same until I lost, and then I changed.
Yeah, I know. I can definitely relate to that. Yeah. Everything is the same until all of a sudden the lucky shirt isn't lucky anymore, right?
Yeah, I do the same now as a trainer, when TJ is showing in the Grand Prix or Volpe or Heiler or whoever it is, or my junior kids, I wear a certain watch, and, and when they win, I keep it until we don't win anymore, then I change it.
And going into a couple of wrap-up questions here. So with you yourself as a rider and now as a trainer, what do you think has made you so successful?
I feel flattered that you tell me I'm so successful, but to me, every day is a journey. And I think what leads to success is, never giving up, hard work. We all have bad times, and bad times could do only 2 things. It could make you give up, or it could make you try harder. And with my personality, I'm very afraid of not trying harder, and I'm terrified of giving up. So that's not an option. So I think what accounts for the success we've had is just working very hard, never giving up, being humble, and owning to your own mistakes and fixing them.
And what would you tell, a young student, you work with a lot of them, a young student with really big aspirations who maybe is in a position where they don't see how they can get to where they want to be? How would you encourage them, to keep moving forward and let them know that, they can get to where they want to be?
It's a very repeated, phrase, but the reality is that we can all do anything we want to do. So what I would say is, we live in the best country in the world. And I mean that, I chose to come here. I wasn't born here. So I do believe that. And then work very hard, believe that you can do it, and don't get anxious when you don't get there as you thought you should have gotten there. Just keep working and it will come. It will come. Everybody gets an opportunity. Everybody gets a chance. It's capitalizing on that and doing the best, because if you do, there's no other choice but, getting to your goal.
And what would you say is the hardest part of the sport for you, whether it be, emotionally or time-wise, it's such a time-consuming sport, or financially? What would you say is the hardest part?
Funny enough, I think the hardest part is when, you have a tremendous, horse, and he comes to an end, his career comes to an end. That's really hard for me because I cherish them a lot. I think without them, we wouldn't do anything. We can talk all day long, but without them, we wouldn't do it. So, when, I try to keep my horses for as long as I can, but, some they have longer careers, some they have shorter. When a great horse comes to the end of his career, or I notice he's coming to the end of his career, that's very hard for me. And then on a much more maybe, superficial way, I think, financially it's getting harder. Things are expensive and it's difficult to get to the best, without spending money or having the funds.
Mm-hmm. And looking back at that, little boy who grew up in Argentina and then came to the States, if you had any advice for him, what would you tell him?
Just do what you think you're doing right and keep doing it and never give up, because they told you so many times that you shouldn't do this and that you wouldn't succeed. And here you are still doing it and somewhere succeeding here and there.
And then last question before we wrap up here. Is there anything that you would like to share that people don't know about you? Just a little tidbit.
I don't know that many people know that I have a wonderful son, Ramiro. He's 21 years old. He's basically the love of my life. He's a wonderful kid. He lives with me now. He spent a lot of his, youth in Argentina, but I don't think a lot of people know about that. And I really am proud of him, and I, love that I have him. That's beautiful. Is he a rider? He's not a rider. He tried to ride a little bit with TJ about 3-4 years ago, but there was no future there.
Yeah, it's not for all of us.
No, but he's a wonderful kid, and I'm so proud of him. I'm blessed that, he's my son. And then I know that you're in Michigan right now. I assume, is that for Traverse City? Yes. Okay, so I was going to ask, what's next for you? So beyond Michigan for the next couple of weeks, what's on your radar? Well, we go home and we have about 2 weeks at home, and then we do Tryon another 2 weeks. In the middle there, McLean is riding a mare named Callas for, a client of mine, the Rivers and Beechwood Stables. And he chosen her to be his Nations Cup, horse for Atkins. So I'm going to try to shoot there to, support him and be there with him, because it's a wonderful venue and one of the best, if not the best show in the world. So I want to be there. Yeah. And then unofficially yet, I'm not sure, but Alessandro Volpi is going to be competing probably in Falsterbo and Hickstead for the U.S. team. So I'm quite excited about that. I'm going to head over there to also help her and support her. And then after that, I think we have Southampton and Gold Cup and all the important stuff that comes in the fall, the end of the summer and fall. Yeah, I mean, surely indoor season is probably the height of your year, right? Yes, it is. Is there anything else that you would like to add about yourself or training or about Stonehenge that you would like people to know about? Well, I think a lot of people know what we are about, but I'm very proud of, the team that we have. I'm proud of everybody that, rides with us and the work that we do in order to get to every show and do the best we can. And, I just, feel very lucky and very happy that I am where I am. Well, thank you again for taking the time to speak with me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm excited for people to get to know you more by listening to this episode. Well, thank you, Julia. It was nice talking to you, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share myself with everybody.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode with Max Amaya, and a big thank you to the sponsor of this week's episode, Purina Animal Nutrition. Learn more at purinamills.com. You can subscribe to the Practical Horseman podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. While you're there, please rate and review the show. Also, tune into our mini-sode series, The FOD Pod, where you'll hear audio lessons from our favorite Practical Horseman on-demand clips. At Practical Horseman On Demand, you can enjoy hundreds of how-to videos and get insider access to exclusive interviews and lectures, slow-motion demonstrations, and step-by-step tutorials taught by top-level pros in the hunter, jumper, equitation, and eventing disciplines. When you tune into the FOD Pod, Listen closely for a promo code for 15% off your Practical Horseman on-demand subscription. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode. I'm Julia Murphy, and you've been listening to the Practical Horseman podcast.